Hey guys! Tonight we drift gently along the banks of the Nile, not the bustling, modern river of Cairo and dams, but a slow-moving, sun-drenched stretch in medieval Nubia, where the golden light is more than just a poetic metaphor. You'll be walking barefoot on warm, dusty paths. The village is quiet, except for the shush of palm leaves, the creak of old wood, and the occasional grunt of a donkey that's had enough of pretending to be patient. Yes, we're entering a time when goldsmiths worked not in grand palaces, but in mud brick rooms, their fingers steady, their breath held, shaping royal gifts beside everyday trinkets. And let's be honest, if you've ever lost your mind trying to untangle a necklace chain, imagine doing that in 1040 AD with no electricity, no internet, and definitely no customer service line to complain to. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while we're at it, post your location and your local time. I love knowing when and where you're listening. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Nile is already awake before you are. You don't rise with an alarm. There isn't one, but with the low sounds of clay pots being lifted, chickens shuffling under woven baskets, and the soft shuffle of sandals on packed dirt. Your mat is rolled to the side, the sleep still clinging to your arms, and there's a coolness to the air that only lasts until the sun fully clears the desert's edge. You pull on your tunic, wash your face with water poured from a clay jug, and make your way through the village. Children dash barefoot past you, their laughter chasing them like sunlight. A goat bleats dramatically, tied too close to a fig tree. It very much wants to eat. The scent of baking bread curls out of a low doorway, mixing with the sharper smell of wood smoke and river mud. You pass rows of small, square homes made from sun-dried brick. Their walls are hand-smoothed and pale, colored by dust and age. Every few houses, you see women sweeping the yards with bundled sticks, sending clouds of powder into the light. Some stop to nod at you, their eyes squinting in the glow. The workshop you're heading to doesn't have a sign. It doesn't need one. People know where the gold lives, tucked behind a larger home with a roof of woven reed mats. The goldsmith's place is cool and dark inside. The ceiling is low enough that you have to duck slightly. You step over a threshold blackened by years of ashen heat. The smell here is unlike anywhere else. Warm metal, old charcoal, beeswax, and something faintly sour, like vinegar mixed with stone. A man, older, bearded, his fingers marked by soot, waves a hand to you, not to say hello, just to say don't step there. That spot on the floor is sacred, or dangerous, or both. No one's ever sure which, so it's best not to ask. He sits cross-legged on a woven mat, a small anvil balanced between his knees. Before him lies a tray with fragments of metal, folded cloth, a half-melted bangle, and a toothpick-sized rod used for delicate carving. Nothing is wasted. Even the shavings have their own pot. The man's name isn't spoken much. You call him Uste, a respectful word for master. Some say he used to work for a bishop's household. Others claim he once repaired a broken brooch for a queen's daughter. He doesn't confirm or deny either. He just nods and keeps working, as if the truth itself might interrupt the rhythm of his hands. His apprentice, a boy barely old enough to braid his own belt, is already fanning the small forge. It doesn't roar, it huffs, like a tired lung breathing fire into copper and gold. The boy's foot pumps a bellows made of goatskin, while his other hand steadies a lump of ore in a small crucible. You can feel the heat from where you sit, low and steady, like a cat curled on your lap. While Uste works, you settle near the wall, careful not to bump any of the hanging tools. There are tiny hammers, pincers like crab claws, folded molds of fired clay, and even a single curved blade made from a sharpened fishbone. Historians still argue whether Nubian artisans inherited their methods from Egypt, Arabia, or forged them independently, carving out a style that quietly defied the rules of neighboring empires. Outside, the village begins to hum, and someone is grinding grain. A goat has broken free, followed by an annoyed shout. The river glimmers in patches between houses, but inside this room, the stillness thickens. Even the flies seem hesitant. Gold isn't melted in a rush, it waits, just on the edge of liquidity, until the exact moment it agrees to change. Uste murmurs something, either a prayer or a recipe, and then tips the crucible just so, letting the glow pour into a mold the size of your thumb. You've never seen anything look so calm while being destroyed. It hardens almost instantly. The mold hisses as it cools. A gentle reminder that transformation doesn't always come with thunder or fire. Sometimes it comes with patience and a small puff of steam. You spend the morning watching filigree being coaxed from wire. No sketchbooks, no blueprints, just memory and rhythm. A circle here, a leaf there, a twist in the middle, occasionally. Usta stops to rub his temples or squint through a sliver of light falling in from the workshop's only high window. By mid-morning, the room grows warmer. Dust motes hang like soft gold in the air. You begin to understand that this place isn't just where jewelry is made, it's where stories are folded into metal. Quiet ones, ones never written down, but worn on ears and wrists, carried like spells. And still, no one rushes. The apprentice brings you a chipped clay cup of water, motioning for you to drink. He has a piece of thread in his teeth and two bangles tied around his ankle, mistakes from older attempts, now worn like charms against future failure. Outside, someone calls his name. He ignores it. The gold is nearly ready. You stay through midday, content to let time drip as slowly as the molten metal itself. The heat has thickened into something you can lean against, and the flies no longer hesitate. They're everywhere now, nudging at your elbows and eyebrows like tiny, persistent critics. No one bothers to shoo them away. In a goldsmith's workshop, concentration is currency, and swatting flies is a waste of both breath and grace. The light pouring through the slit of a window has shifted, falling now in a long diagonal that cuts across the floor. Beneath it, Uste has begun a new piece, a pendant, perhaps, or part of a decorative clasp. It's hard to tell. He rarely says what he's making, and you've learned not to ask. Half the magic lies in the silence. The tools he uses for this stage are so small, you feel your eyes narrowing just watching. A bit of coiled wire, the width of a hair, is balanced on a tiny block of stone. He holds a chisel no longer than a finger joint and taps it with a tool shaped like a miniature drumstick. The sound it makes is high and shy, like a mouse knocking politely. The walls around you bear the fingerprints of generations. Some patches of plaster are smooth, others chipped away to reveal the straw within. Tucked in one corner is a shelf where broken things go, half-finished rings, snapped chains, miscast shapes. The apprentice once whispered to you that Uste calls it the quiet drawer, as if the mistakes are simply resting, waiting to be reborn, now and then. He reaches for his bowl of beeswax. It's a warm, golden lump, used to steady fine wires or shape soft molds. You wouldn't think wax and gold would get along, one so fleeting, the other so eternal, but here they seem like old friends. A tiny thread of gold is pressed into a wax base, curled like a fern, and fused to the pendant's spine with a touch from the heated needle. The fire is kept small, almost shy. This isn't the roaring forge of Hollywood fantasy. There are no anvils as big as chests, no sparks flying like fireworks. Here, it's all hush and murmur. A shallow bowl of charcoal, a pair of tongs, a breath of flame from a bent pipe. The gold surrenders because it's asked softly. The air smells of metal and lemony herbs. You glance toward the windowsill and spot a bundle of dried leaves tied with a strip of cloth. You recognize the scent now, lemon balm, maybe, or sweet basil. Both were rubbed on the hands before working with gold. Some say it wards off bad luck. Others insist it keeps the skin soft. Historians still argue whether Nubian smiths picked up this practice from Persian apothecaries or adapted local herbal traditions to their own ends. The truth, like so many things in Nubia, is probably somewhere between trade and memory. You sit still as Uste begins filing down the edge of a disc, turning it with thumbs and forefinger like a prayer bead. The sound is gentle, like distant sand shifting under hooves. The apprentice now holds the bowl steady, his eyes fixed with an intensity usually reserved for oracles or lost coins. To your left, a row of wooden pegs protrudes from the wall. On them hang strips of hammered metal, some no thicker than paper, each with faint lines and dots scored into them. They look like they've been marked in code, symbols that hint at animals, stars, or protective blessings. Uste once muttered that every goldsmith had a private language, something between a ledger and a lullaby. You begin to notice that no one ever raises their voice in here. Even the sounds of the tools have a respectful tone, clicks, taps, and faint scrapes. It's like watching someone carve meaning into silence. The afternoon stretches. The apprentice quietly fans the coals again, not with the bellows this time, but a palm frond cut into strips. You watch him sweep it back and forth, slow and steady, eyes unfocused, the way you might stroke a sleeping cat. The fire listens. There is a rhythm here, not a dramatic one, but something closer to breath, or tide, melt, shape, file, polish, repeat. No one rushes because gold doesn't care for haste. You wonder if that's why so many smiths seem ageless, like they've made some unspoken pact with time itself. The pendant is nearly done now. Ust lifts it up with a pair of pincers, turning it slowly in the light like a man inspecting a loaf of bread before breaking it. He squints, grunts, then, satisfied, sets it into a shallow dish filled with pale sand to cool. You stretch your legs as quietly as possible and step outside for a moment. The light hits you like a slap wrapped in velvet. It's not painful, just shocking. The smells change instantly, from fire and metal to fig, dust, and distant water. Someone nearby is pounding sorghum with a heavy stick. The sound thuds through the air like a heartbeat you'd forgotten. Behind you, the workshop breathes on without pause. In the distance, the Nile curves lazily through green banks. White egrets flap low over the surface. A fisherman pulls a narrow skiff with such slow grace that he seems part of the river rather than a visitor upon it. You wonder what he'd trade for a pendant, like the one Uste just made. Probably not much. Gold has no use on water. You make your way back inside, feet quieter now, ears a little more attuned. The apprentice has moved on to polishing, rubbing a thin chain against a soft cloth, stained black at the fingertips. Uste watches, nods once, and begins setting out the tools for the next piece. Evening will come eventually. Meals will be shared. The forge will cool. But for now, in this place where metal and meaning mingle like smoke and sunlight, the work continues. The next morning starts earlier than you expect, before the sun has even stretched its arms fully across the sky. A rooster is somewhere in the village, doing his usual routine of shouting about nothing in particular. You barely register it. What pulls you out of your mat is the quiet clink of metal and the soft scrape of sandals in the dust. Usti is already awake, of course he is. Today. The focus isn't on shaping or filing, it's about the gold itself. You follow Uste and his apprentice down a narrow footpath that winds away from the village, past low fences of woven reeds and into a more rugged landscape. The air smells faintly of river mud and desert stone. It's a scent that feels old, older than you, older than this village, maybe older than gold. You're not going far, just to the home of a visiting trader. He's recently arrived with a pouch of ore said to be from Wadi Alaki, the legendary gold-bearing region deep in the eastern desert. It's a name that carries weight, both literally and figuratively, according to the stories. Gold has been pulled from those rocks since the days when pharaohs wore eyeliner and claimed divinity as a side hustle. The trader himself is a wiry man with a heavy beard and a voice like gravel. He greets Uste with a respectful nod, then unwraps a cloth bundle on a mat. Inside are dull, irregular stones that look like they belong in a ditch, not a diadem. You have to squint to believe they contain anything valuable at all. But Uste leans forward and lifts one to the light. His expression doesn't change, but his thumb rubs the stone with a familiarity that feels nearly affectionate. Gold in this form isn't beautiful. It's not shiny. It doesn't sparkle. It hides in veins and specks, like a secret that only heat and patience can coax into honesty. The first step is to crush it, gently, thoroughly, mercilessly. Back in the workshop, a stone mortar and pestle are brought out, worn smooth by decades of grinding. The apprentice pours in a handful of ore and begins to work. The sound it makes is deep and gritty, like someone whispering through sand. Tiny flecks begin to break loose. Usta sprinkles in a bit of vinegar and ash, an old recipe, passed down like a lullaby, said to encourage the gold to show itself. Historians still argue whether this purification method was an independent Nubian innovation or adapted from Byzantine chemical texts that wandered southward through trade and war. What's clear is that the process works, even if no one agrees exactly why. Once ground, the mixture is heated in a crucible, the same small bowl you saw yesterday. This time, though, it's lined with a layer of powdered brick and goat dung. Yes, dung. It acts as a flux, drawing out impurities and encouraging the gold to pool together. The smell is memorable. You try not to breathe too deeply. As the bowl glows orange, Uste bends close, not to adjust anything, but simply to watch. He tilts his head the way you might look at clouds to see faces or animals. Eventually, he nods, a good nod, the kind that says the metal is ready to confess. He lifts the crucible with a pair of tongs and pours its contents into a small mold, a brick-sized basin made from a sand and clay mix, lined with charcoal dust. The liquid metal flows like syrup, thick and sullen. It settles with a faint hiss, then darkens as it cools. What's left behind is something closer to what you'd call gold, a lump of soft yellow, about the size of a chicken egg, dull but undeniably valuable. Oost sets it aside like it's a sleeping baby. The apprentice immediately begins cleaning the tools with water and sand, scrubbing the bowl as if it had just insulted someone's grandmother. You sit in the corner, watching. You've learned not to speak during this part. Everyone here treats raw gold with a kind of reverence, not flashy, not worshipful, but careful, like they know that this metal has been fought over, stolen, buried, worn, and grieved. Outside the workshop, the village has shifted into mid-morning. A donkey brays with existential angst. Someone's yelling about lentils. Children laugh. But inside, the silence holds. Uste cuts a small piece from the cooled gold lump, sets it on an anvil, and taps it flat with a series of soft, precise blows. With each strike, the gold flattens and shines, like it's remembering what it is. He rubs it between his fingers and holds it up. There's a moment where the light catches it just right, and you realize why gold matters. It doesn't just shine, it glows, not like fire, like memory. The gold now is ready to be weighed. Uste brings out his balance, two tiny dishes suspended from a carved wooden arm. It's not fancy, but it's accurate. On one side, he places the flattened piece. On the other, a set of smooth stones, each one marked with faint notches. These are the standard weights, and they've been in his family longer than the roof over the house. He adjusts, adds, subtracts, mutters. Finally, he nods. The scales rest even. The gold has declared its worth. This step may seem small, but it's everything. The right weight means the right price. It means trust, reputation, future trades. In Nubian markets, gold was often measured not just in coin, but in carats, miscal, and even beads of equivalent worth. Some goldsmiths wore their measuring stones around their necks, like amulets. Others hid them in clay jars buried beneath their homes, just in case. The apprentice writes the weight into a scrap of parchment. You're mildly surprised. Most everything here feels oral, passed hand to hand, but Uste insists on some written records, especially when the gold has traveled far. He stores the parchment in a small pouch hanging from a ceiling hook, along with others dating back who knows how long. You sit back again, arms crossed behind your head. The gold is ready. Not quite a jewel, not quite raw, just a promise. Quiet and heavy and glowing. The sun has barely tilted toward noon before the tools come out again. Not the hammers or chisels this time, but the quieter instruments, the ones that don't announce themselves with clangs or sparks. They're laid out with the reverence of surgical tools, each wrapped in cloth and stored in little reed boxes that smell faintly of smoke and saffron. The apprentice unfolds one of them like he's handling secrets, which, in a way, he is. What you see first is the bellows, two of them, actually, made from goat hide stretched over a carved wooden base. When pressed, they breathe in and out with a soft, leathery wheeze. These bellows are not just for drama. They feed the forge with carefully measured air, coaxing the charcoal to stay just hot enough for the work. If the flame burns too cold, the gold sulks. Too hot, and it warps. Either way, Uste ends up glaring. Next, he reaches for the crucible again. But this isn't the same one used for purification. This one's narrower, built for control. It has a lip shaped like a bird's beak, useful for pouring without spills. It's already blackened from past work, its surface etched with rings of soot and mineral bloom that look almost like tree rings. You wonder how many stories are baked into that tiny bowl. The mold is prepared next. It's a two-part form, carved from fired clay, with a cavity the size and shape of a small brooch. The pieces fit together with such precision, you suspect the mold was made by someone who once argued with a brick wall about perfection and won. You sit near the far wall, careful not to cast a shadow over the work. Shadows are considered rude here, an accidental interruption of the gold's journey. Light, flame, and air must move freely. You notice now, for the first time, that the workshop was designed for this exact choreography. Every opening, every crack in the wall serves the dance. Uste steadies the crucible over the fire, propped between two bricks. The apprentice squeezes the bellows in a slow, steady rhythm, left, right, like a heartbeat that belongs not to a person, but to the forge itself, inside the crucible. The gold softens, then puddles. It's not dramatic, no fireworks, just a slow shift from stubborn solid to ready liquid, like it's deciding to trust you. The mold is dusted with ash and held ready. Oost gives a brief nod. The apprentice tilts the crucible just slightly, and the gold flows into the mold with the grace of spilled honey. No one speaks. Even the flies retreat. Then comes the waiting. You watch as the mold cools, the clay hissing softly where heat meets moisture. A few stray sparks jump from the edge, landing on the floor and dying with a whisper. Oost counts silently, then cracks the mold open. Inside lies a simple form, an unpolished medallion, still clinging to the clay's imprint. It doesn't look like much. It's dull, a little lumpy. But Uste smiles, the kind of smile that only happens when something behaves itself. He lifts the piece with tongs, then dunks it into a bowl of water. The sizzle is louder than you expect, and a curl of steam wraps around his arm like a ghost, leaving politely. He holds the medallion up and examines it, then passes it to the apprentice without a word. What happens next is quieter still, polishing. The apprentice settles in near the doorway where the light is better. He dips a piece of cloth into a small jar of oil, pressed from seeds that grow along the riverbanks, and begins to rub the medallion in slow, circular strokes. He hums while he works, not a song you recognize, but a tune that seems older than the dust between the bricks. Beside him, a row of tools rests on a wooden board, burnishers made from smoothed agate, needle files, soft brushes fashioned from horsehair and fig bark. You pick one up. It feels like it was made for a hand that never fidgets. Historians still argue whether these tools were based on Roman methods brought down the Nile, or if they reflect an indigenous Nubian tradition that simply preferred elegance over excess. Either way, the result is the same surface transformed into story, while the apprentice polishes. Uste returns to the tool rack. He lifts a tiny engraving chisel and a wooden mallet. The next step is the detail, the soul of the piece. The medallion, now gleaming faintly, is placed on a small pad of leather. Uste leans over it, face inches from the metal. He begins to tap, soft, precise strikes that cut lines into the gold like whispers in script. You watch as a pattern emerges, not a name, not a symbol you can identify, just a curve of vines, an arc of dots, and a scattering of stars. They say every goldsmith has a signature motif, something they add not for recognition, but for balance, as if the gold would feel incomplete without it. There are legends of some goldsmiths hiding entire verses in the scrollwork of a bangle, love confessions in earrings, prayers in the twist of a necklace chain. Even now, researchers squint through magnifying glasses at museum pieces, still trying to decode whether those markings are decoration or scripture. The medallion is finished by late afternoon. It gleams softly, not in a flashy way, but like it remembers the fire that made it. Oost wraps it in cloth and places it inside a carved box lined with goat wool. You expect something grander, but here, practicality is luxury. The tools are cleaned again, placed in their pouches, and set away. The forge is fed one last breath from the bellows, then left to exhale into silence. You stay long after everyone else has left the workshop. There's something about the space now, in this final quiet, that makes you want to breathe more slowly. The gold is resting. So are you. The medallion made yesterday doesn't stay in the workshop for long. By the next morning, it's already wrapped, packed, and handed off to a tall man in a faded blue robe, his donkey swaying beneath baskets of grain and cloth. He barely says a word, just nods, accepts the bundle, and sets off down the main path out of the village. That's how most finished gold leaves this place quietly. No procession, no guards, no chest lined with silk, just a whisper of weight in a pouch, tucked beneath flatbread or grain sacks, traveling by river or trail to the next hand in the chain. And there are many hands, because in Nubia, even in the medieval period, gold was rarely just a local affair. Today, you tag along with Uste as he visits the riverside market. It's not a long walk, 20 minutes at most, but every step takes you closer to a different kind of noise. The hum of trade, the rustle of reed mats, the high calls of bartering voices trying to outdo one another with promises of rare dyes, longer bolts of cloth, sweeter dates, or salt that was absolutely never wet. You arrive at the market's edge just as a boat docks. It's a long, narrow craft, its hull coated with tar, and its deck crowded with rolled-up rugs, painted pottery, and cages of live chickens that clearly don't appreciate their role in international commerce. The crew hops off barefoot, unloading baskets of sesame and bundles of dried fish. Here is where the life of gold turns social. Under a broad canopy of woven palm fronds, merchants set up their stalls. Some are simple mats on the ground. Others boast folding tables made from repurposed shutters. Uste doesn't have a stall. He doesn't need one. Instead, he moves from vendor to vendor, nodding politely, chatting in short bursts, offering repairs on bracelets or inspections of old rings that may or may not be brass pretending to be better. You watch a negotiation unfold between him and a trader from farther south, possibly from near Dongola, who's offering amber beads and a cracked mirror with a decorative bronze handle. Uste inspects the handle first. He runs a finger along its back, taps it with a thumbnail, and asks a question you don't catch. The trader shrugs, then pulls out a small pouch, gold dust, not coins, not bars, just dust, a fine, warm powder stored in a folded piece of parchment sealed with a bit of wax. Uste opens it, examines it under a slant of sunlight, and nods. In Nubia, gold was often traded in dust form, weighed carefully against stones or counterbalancing goods. Historians still argue whether these markets operated on standardized weights or if each region improvised, trusting the eye and reputation of long-standing traders. Either way, Trust seems more valuable than any ledger. Around you, the market swirls. A young boy offers roasted dates wrapped in banana leaves. A woman walks past with anklets that jingle faintly, leading a goat decorated with bits of blue ribbon. Behind you, two men are locked in a dramatic argument over the value of turmeric versus saffron, though you suspect it's less about spices and more about pride. And then there's the gold, not in vaults, not in display cases, but woven into this noise, hanging from ears, stitched into headscarves, hidden beneath sleeves, and worn on toes. Here, jewelry is not just fashion, it's currency, collateral, family history, insurance policy. It tells you whether someone's married, or wealthy, or recently forgiven after a particularly public argument. You spot one woman bartering with a length of chain wound around her wrist. She unclasps it, lays it gently beside a bolt of indigo cloth, and waits. The merchant examines it, weighs it with a small pebble scale, then gestures toward two extra handfuls of cloth. A deal is made. The chain disappears into a pouch. The woman moves on. Uste finishes his transactions with a few nods and a laugh you rarely hear in the workshop. Out here, he's looser, more talkative. He picks up a mango and sniffs it like a critic inspecting wine. The fruit seller gives him a look that says, "You always sniff, but you never buy." They both grin. As you walk back through the market, you pass a row of bead merchants. Their wares hang in cascades: amber, carnelian, shell, glass. Some of the beads are clearly ancient, their surfaces pitted and worn smooth like river stones. Others are newer, brighter, still shouting for attention. A quiet debate simmers near one of the stalls. Two men examine a gold ring inset with a blue-green stone, possibly turquoise, possibly just cleverly dyed ceramic. They argue in soft voices about its origin. One insists it came from Axum. The other swears it belonged to his grandmother's cousin, whose husband was definitely not a thief. No conclusion is reached. The ring is set aside. Tea is poured instead. On the way home, Oost stops at the edge of the river. He crouches by the water, rinses his hands, and studies the ripples. You mimic him, splashing your face and blinking at the reflected sky. The river moves slowly, but always forward. When you return to the village, the sun is lowering and the workshop is waiting. The forge is cold, the tools tucked away, but on the wall near the door, someone has left a small cloth pouch with a knot tied just so. You know what's inside: a commission, gold dust, maybe a design scribbled onto a scrap of papyrus. The market may be loud, but here, business resumes in whispers. By the time the next morning breaks, you're used to the rhythm of this world quiet mornings, dusty feet, and the soft punctuation of metalwork. But today feels a little different. There's no gold to melt, no fire yet lit. Instead, Oost is sitting on a low stool with a bowl of lentils in his lap and a piece of flatbread tucked beneath his elbow like a secret snack. He gestures for you to sit, and soon you find yourself on a mat outside the workshop, under the sparse shade of a fig tree whose branches creak more than they rustle. Today is a rest day, or at least a slower one. You'll still hear the clang of metal before dusk. But for now, it's about village life, and food, and gossip. Of course, the bowl of lentils is seasoned with garlic and some crushed green herb you can't name. There's also kisra, a spongy sour flatbread made from fermented sorghum, torn and used to scoop up everything edible. You're handed a piece with the solemn authority of a royal decree, Nearby, a group of children is chasing a goat in circles, each more determined than the last to catch it, even though everyone, including the goat, seems to know this is a futile mission. One of the older women watches from a bench, muttering something about how that goat is smarter than most of the men in this village. No one disagrees. The goldsmiths may have fire in their fingers, but the real forge of this place is in these slow mornings, where news and nonsense swirl together like steam rising from a cooking pot. Someone mentions that a wedding is coming next week. Another says, no, it's not a wedding. It's a naming ceremony, though they agree that either way, there will be dancing. Uste chuckles softly and breaks his bread with more enthusiasm than usual. He likes dancing. You file that fact away like a coin. Behind you, in the shadows of the workshop, the apprentice is sitting cross-legged, fiddling with a strand of copper wire. He's not working, not really, just coiling and uncoiling, his hands moving automatically. That's the thing about apprenticeships in places like this. You don't stop learning just because the fire is out. You observe everything, even how a master eats his lunch, as you rest. A young woman approaches the workshop. She's carrying a small bag of broken trinkets, bracelets missing clasps, earrings bent out of shape, a ring that looks like it's been stepped on more than once. She unwraps the pieces onto a reed mat and waits. Uste doesn't jump up. He finishes chewing, wipes his fingers, and rises with the kind of slowness that isn't laziness. It's earned. He kneels beside the jewelry, picks up each piece, turns it in his fingers, and says nothing for several minutes. The woman waits. She knows the ritual. Finally, he nods and murmurs something about bringing them back in 2 days. She seems pleased, not thrilled, just quietly satisfied, like someone who'd been worried her heirlooms were beyond saving. You ask Uste if she's a client. He shakes his head. Family, he says. You don't press the definition. In this village, family means anyone you wouldn't hesitate to help when the roof leaks or the goats escape. In the late afternoon, a small group gathers near the workshop. Most are fellow artisans, not all goldsmiths. There's a man who carves bone hairpins, a woman who paints ceramic tiles, and 2 brothers who dye cloth with indigo so dark it could pass for the night sky. They're not here to work together. Exactly. It's more like a shared silence, a communal nod that says we make things too. Someone hands around a clay cup filled with a drink you suspect is half mint tea, half melted sugar. You sip, your teeth tingle. One of the brothers pulls out a bundle of dyed cloth and unwraps it. Inside is a length of thin gold chain, a little tangled, slightly tarnished. Uste takes it, holds it up to the light, and makes a low sound that could mean admiration or concern. It's always hard to tell. He examines the clasp, tests the links, then gestures for a needle, not the kind used for fabric, a goldsmith's needle, shaped for repairs so delicate you'd think they involved surgery. He threads a thin wire through the chain and begins to untangle it, his fingers moving with exaggerated patience. You glance around. No one speaks. Everyone's watching, sipping their tea, breathing in time with the process. Historians still argue whether these artisans shared guild-like structures in Nubia, formal associations with rules, apprenticeships, and hierarchies, or whether they operated through looser networks of skill and mutual respect. What's clear, at least here, is that knowledge flows more through conversation than documentation. The chain is fixed. Uste passes it back. There's no payment, just a nod and a brief exchange of cloth for gold. Not quite barter, not quite favor, something in between. Everyone seems satisfied. As the sun begins to dip, the courtyard clears. The apprentice lights the forge, not for a major project, but to reshape a bit of scrap metal into a decorative clasp. You watch the glow return to the workshop like an old friend slipping back into a familiar chair. The goat returns, too, now wearing a flower behind one ear and looking, frankly, smug about it. You sit on the threshold, watching as the last light softens the outlines of the buildings, the trees, and the people. It's not a day of great events, but it's one you'll remember, not for the gold, for the goldsmiths. The next morning carries with it a kind of subtle ceremony, not drums or feathers or parades, just the quiet return of purpose. The forge breathes again, the tools are unwrapped, and the workshop hums with a familiar focus. But today, there's someone new in the room. She enters without hesitation, mid-30s, perhaps, in a light brown headscarf and tunic dyed with onion skin yellow. Her walk says she's been here before. She doesn't wait for permission. She takes a seat on a low stool near the wall, unwraps a bundle of tools from a goat hide pouch, and begins checking her chisels with a precision that would make Uste proud. You learn her name is Nura. She's not Uste's sister, or wife or apprentice. She's a goldsmith in her own right. Her hands bear the signs, knuckles slightly calloused, fingernails darkened at the edges, fingertips smoothed to that telltale softness you've come to recognize. When she picks up a blank gold bangle, her grip is confident. She holds it to the light, not with hesitation, but with a familiar kind of criticism. She's not admiring it, says she's assessing. You glance at Uste, expecting some comment, some explanation, but he just nods to her and returns to his work. The moment is so undramatic that you nearly miss how radical it is. In many parts of the medieval world, goldsmithing was a male-guarded trade. Guilds, workshops, and royal courts often excluded women from the formal ranks of artisanship, but not here, in medieval Nubia, especially along certain stretches of the Nile. Women played central roles in the making, selling, and managing of jewelry. Historians still argue whether this inclusion was a legacy of older Nubian matrilineal traditions or simply a practical evolution born of family-run workshops. Either way, the record is clear women like Nura were not just allowed, they were expected to contribute. She begins work on a pair of earrings, using a tiny burin to etch spirals along their outer rim. The design is delicate, almost hypnotic, echoing the movement of river eddies and fig leaves in wind. She stops now and then to blow gold dust from the grooves, then resumes, unbothered by your staring. Next to her sits a young girl, 10, maybe 11, braiding strands of copper wire around tiny beads. Her name is Safia, Noura's niece. She's not just playing. This is her training, her apprenticeship, her ticket into the world of craft. She holds the wire steady, tongue pressed between her teeth in concentration. You crouch beside her and ask what she's making. She doesn't look up but mumbles something about ankle bells, not for sale, for dancing. There's a moment of laughter in the workshop, a light burst that startles the silence. The apprentice has managed to singe the corner of his tunic while adjusting the coals. He jumps, flaps it out, and looks around as if hoping no one noticed. Everyone did. Even Uste cracks a smile. Nura rolls her eyes. Sophia giggles. The mood settles again, and you find yourself noticing something subtle, the way the work moves between hands without hierarchy. Uste passes Nura a piece of tooling wax without a word. She tests the temperature and hands it to Safia, who kneads it between her palms until it's soft enough to shape. No one gives instructions, they just do. On one wall of the workshop hangs a long strip of woven cloth, embroidered with tiny golden discs, stitched in rows. Some are plain, others are inscribed with patterns, stars, or initials. It's not decoration, it's a kind of record marking every woman who's worked in this space. Each disc tells a story, a woman who forged marriage bands for 3 generations, a widow who turned salvaged gold into bracelets to buy back her land, a girl who once melted her own earrings to save her brother from debt. The discs aren't labeled, but the stories are known. Safia can recite most of them. You realize that gold here isn't just crafted, it's inherited, adapted, reimagined. Noura's tools once belonged to her grandmother. Safia's first hammer is already being shaped from a discarded bone pin. Nothing is wasted. Not the metal, not the skill, not the story. The afternoon draws on, and Noura begins to set a small stone into one of the earrings, blue-green, like Nile water at dusk. She fits it into a bezel made from a curled strip of gold, tapping it gently into place with a polished thorn. You ask her where the stone is from. Farther than here, she replies, then smiles, which is not an answer, but not a refusal either. Historians still puzzle over the origins of some stones found in Nubian jewelry: lapis from Afghanistan, garnet from India, carnelian from Arabia. How did they arrive here? Tucked into brooches, in villages barely charted on medieval maps, trade tribute travelers with pockets full of sparkle. No one's sure, but Noura's answer is better farther than here. As the light begins to dim, she finishes the second earring, sets it beside the first, and wraps them both in a bit of dyed cloth. Safia helps her fold the tools. They clean the space together, brushing gold dust from the floor with a bundle of date fronds. When Noura leaves, she doesn't say goodbye. She just lifts a hand, 2 fingers raised, and disappears into the fading light. Safia stays a moment longer, organizing the tool pouches. Then she, too, is gone. The workshop feels quieter now, not empty, just waiting for the next pair of hands. The morning after Noura's visit, the workshop wakes to a different kind of purpose. There's a certain hush in the air, not the sleepy quiet of early hours, but the low, steady stillness that comes when something special is being prepared. A commission has arrived. You don't hear about it from Uste, or even the apprentice. It's the woman from the fig tree, the one who said the goat was smarter than most men. She stops you outside, leans in conspiratorially, and whispers, "He's making royal things today." Then, without elaborating, she walks away, laughing into her scarf. You step into the workshop and see it instantly. Everything's cleaner than usual. The coals are being stirred not with the usual casual swipes, but with focused attention. The tools have been laid out with extra care. Even the apprentice is standing straighter, though that may have more to do with the cloth-wrapped bundle on Uste's mat. It's not large, maybe the size of a folded shawl, but the weight of it, even just sitting there, is obvious. Uste opens the cloth with care, like a letter he already knows by heart. Inside are gold pieces in various stages of completion, a filigree diadem with a row of empty sockets for stones. 2 rings engraved with looping script, and a pair of anklets that jingle softly when disturbed. These are not for a village bride or a market stall. These are for someone whose name you probably won't hear, and definitely shouldn't say aloud. Royal commissions come with rules. They're not written down anywhere, but you can feel them in the way Usta's fingers move, slower, more deliberate. The apprentice doesn't ask questions. He just fetches what's needed and steps back. The usual undercurrent of quiet teasing is gone. Today, everything is gold and gravity. You perch in the corner, observing. Uste begins with the diadem. He lifts it carefully, inspecting every joint, every curl of wire. The shape is elegant, but not showy, more arc than crown, with scalloped edges that suggest lotus petals or possibly sun rays. He sets it on a padded stand and reaches for a fine needle file. His grip firm but delicate. He files one section of the band, adjusting a curve by the faintest amount. It's the kind of change you wouldn't notice unless you were the person wearing it, or the person trying to impress a very particular court official. He moves next to the rings. These are smaller, but more ornate. You lean in closer to see the script delicate lines that form a prayer or poem. You can't be sure. The language is Old Nubian, stylized almost beyond recognition. Historians still debate the extent to which medieval Nubian courts preserved their native tongue in writing, or whether Coptic and Arabic gradually replaced it in formal documents. But here, at least, the script survives, etched not in parchment, but in gold. Oost touches up the lines with a pointed burnisher, smoothing edges, deepening curves. He doesn't rewrite, just reinforces, like someone preserving a memory that's already fading at the edges. The anklets come last. They're thicker, braided with small charms and hollow bells shaped like fig seeds. One is slightly dented. Uste frowns, then hands it to the apprentice, who kneels beside the hearth and begins heating a small pot of resin, used to steady the metal while he reshapes it from the inside out. You watch this process in silence, amazed again by how calm it is. Royal work in some places involves courts, scribes, and enough ceremony to require 3 musicians and a bored falcon. Here, it's 2 men and a hearth the size of a stew pot. By midday, the diadem is nearly complete. Uste holds it up to the light, turning it slowly. He adjusts one final curl, then wraps it in a soft cloth dyed with crushed pomegranate skins. The rings go next, each cushioned in a pouch of cotton and dried flowers, both for padding and for scent. The anklets follow. He doesn't box them, he bundles them, carefully, reverently, like something both beautiful and dangerous. As he works, you remember what someone said at the market, that royal gold wasn't always worn. Sometimes it was hidden, buried, tucked away in sealed jars or linen pouches, protected by curses more than locks. Gold had value, yes, but also meaning, power, risk, and some pieces were never meant to be worn at all. In one of the corner baskets near the wall, you spot something different, a flat, circular plaque, perhaps 3 fingers across, engraved with a crescent and star motif. You ask about it. Oost glances at it and shrugs. Amulet, he says, for a horse. That's it. No further explanation. Just a charm for an animal. Royal steeds needed luck, too, apparently. Historians still argue whether these equestrian ornaments were used for decoration, identification, or some hybrid form of magical protection. The few that survive in museums are usually mistaken for human jewelry, their purpose forgotten. You wonder if this one will end up misinterpreted a few centuries from now, sitting in a glass case with a label that gets it entirely wrong. By late afternoon, the package is ready. A courier arrives, not in a chariot, not in silks, just a lean man in traveling robes with a falcon feather tucked into his belt and dust in his beard. He doesn't enter the workshop. He waits at the edge, just hands folded. Oost wraps the bundle one more time in a protective cloth and walks it out himself. No fanfare, just a quiet handoff and a nod exchanged between men who probably share no words but understand everything. The courier disappears down the path, a cloud of sunlit dust rising around his feet. You sit back on your mat, the forge now cool again, the tools already being cleaned, another royal order completed, another whisper of gold sent downriver, headed for a palace courtyard, or a desert fortress, or a bride's veiled ceremony. No one will know it came from here. But that's the point. There are no royal commissions today, no mysterious couriers, no bundles wrapped in pomegranate-dyed cloth, just an ordinary morning, if such a thing exists in a village where gold is part of daily life. You wander outside early, before the forge is lit, before the apprentice finishes rubbing the sleep out of his eyes. A breeze stirs the reeds near the river, and in the distance, someone is singing a work song, low and rhythmic, like a lullaby for the Nile. You follow the sound through a narrow alley flanked by walls, smoothed with palm fronds and patched with old mud. At the end, a small stall opens onto the main market path, and there, resting on a flat stone, are a dozen simple gold rings, gleaming in the early sun like forgotten coins waiting to be claimed. This is not Usta's work. The stall belongs to Dahlia, a jeweler who sells directly to the village. No forge, no apprentice, just her tools, and a lifetime of memory. She sits cross-legged on a woven mat, stringing beads onto a thread, her gold pieces laid out like snacks at a family gathering. Her work isn't intricate, no filigree, no inscriptions, just smooth bands, tiny earrings, and nose rings shaped like soft spirals. They're affordable, lightweight, made to be worn, lost, replaced, and worn again. You pick one up. It's warm from the sun and still bears faint marks from where the gold was hammered flat. Dahlia watches you with a raised eyebrow, not suspicious, just amused. Looks plain, she says. But that ring's been to 4 weddings, 1 funeral, and a grain riot. You blink. She doesn't explain. This is what fascinates you most about jewelry in Nubia. It lives more lives than the people who wear it. A ring given as a dowry may end up melted down to fund a boat. A pair of earrings might pass from mother to daughter's best friend, to the woman who buys lentils twice a week and likes them a little overcooked. Nothing stays where it starts. Even the simplest trinkets have a story. And stories are currency here. Dahlia tells you about a man who once paid for a camel with a necklace, not because the necklace was valuable, though it was, but because the man who made it had survived a lightning strike and walked away singing. People said the necklace carried a trace of that survival, like a blessing baked into metal. Historians still argue whether gold jewelry in Nubian markets served more economic or spiritual roles. But here in Dahlia's stall, it's clearly both. Every piece is weighed and bartered for, but also named, blessed, and remembered. You return to the workshop before midday and find the apprentice working on something small, not a commission, a gift, a child's bracelet, shaped from scrap gold and studded with 2 tiny blue beads. For my sister, he says without looking up. She bites people. You nod solemnly. That tracks. Uste is nearby, sorting through a basket of finished pieces. Earrings, pins, simple brooches. They're destined for the next market trip, not for royals, for neighbors, friends, strangers who will wear them, forget them, maybe lose them in a riverbank, and never think of them again. But before they go, each one is examined. He picks them up one by one, holds them to the light, checks the soldering and the shape. A plain pin catches his eye. He frowns, sets it aside, and begins reshaping the end, where the metal had curled too tightly. You sit beside him and ask whether he prefers royal commissions or simple pieces like these. He shrugs. Gold is gold, he says, but people wear it differently. You get the sense he's not talking about jewelry anymore. That afternoon, a group of villagers gathers by the riverbank. It's not a festival, just a kind of social pause. People sitting in shaded spots, washing clothes, sharing dates and sweet tea. Several of them wear gold earrings, necklaces, little rings barely hanging on. Not one of them looks like they're thinking about the value. You spot one woman wearing a necklace you saw in the workshop a week ago. You remember the small crescent charm Uste had reshaped. Now it rests against her collarbone, mostly hidden by her scarf. She laughs loudly at a joke you didn't hear and adjusts the necklace without thinking. It catches the light just once that night, back in the workshop. The apprentice asks what happens to the jewelry that gets lost. The question seems sudden, but Uste answers without pause. It waits for what the apprentice asks, for someone to remember where it was dropped. The answer makes no sense, and yet it somehow explains everything, because in this world, jewelry isn't about ownership, it's about passage, from wrist to wrist, from market to mat, from one quiet life to another. The smell of lentils is back, but today it's cut with something sweeter, dates roasting over a tiny flame, wrapped in palm leaves. Their sugars caramelizing into sticky gold. Someone's cooking in the courtyard again, which means news is coming. And as with all things in this village, news arrives slowly, with seasoning. You sit beside the workshop doorway, watching the sunlight ease across the floor. The apprentice is polishing a bracelet with a strip of cloth that's seen better centuries. Usterian, meanwhile, is sitting with a woman in her late 50s, her hair threaded with silver, her arms jingling softly with bangles. Her name is Mala, and she's here for a dowry, not her own, she clarifies with a dry laugh. Those days are dust, she says. It's for my niece. She's marrying a potter. I told her at least clay doesn't rust. She unwraps a bundle containing 5 pieces of gold, 2 earrings, a ring, a pendant shaped like a water droplet, and a coiled bracelet that looks like it's been wound and unwound 100 times. Each piece has its own dents, bends, and wear, tokens of a life lived, not curated. Uste inspects the items with soft hands, as if they might crumble. He asks quiet questions. When was the ring last reshaped? What happened to the missing clasp on the pendant? Did the bracelet always squeak like that? Mala answers, with the blunt poetry of someone who's spent decades not apologizing. The ring got caught on a goat horn. The clasp broke when my niece dropped it in a water jar. The bracelet squeaks because her cousin tried to fix it with butter. You lean in. This is no mere transaction. It's a negotiation between past and future. Mala wants the gold cleaned, reshaped, and partly melted to create something new, a wedding set to be given during the ceremony. Here in Nubia, gold as dowry isn't just a gift, it's a statement of continuity. It signals status, yes, but also trust, blessing, and the promise of care. The gold that was once worn by a mother becomes a shield for a daughter. It isn't buried in drawers. It moves, adapts, glows in new contexts. Historians still argue whether the Nubian dowry tradition leaned more toward Egyptian or Arab influence, or whether it represents a native blend of both. What they all agree on it was never static. Dowries weren't one-time events. They were living, breathing gold, shaped across generations. The apprentice begins sorting the items by function, what needs repair, what will be melted, what might be adapted. Usta sketches a new design in the dust with a stick, nothing formal, just a swirling pattern of vines and dots that will eventually become a necklace. Mala watches, nods, then adds one final item to the pile, a thin gold chain with a tiny bell attached. Her mother wore that on her wedding day, she says. It needs to sound the same. The bell is tested by shaking it gently near your ear. The sound is soft, high, with a slight crackle like a grain being crushed underfoot. It doesn't ring, it whispers. Uste listens 3 times before nodding. He understands the request, not just a replica, the same sound. You sit quietly through the rest of the morning, watching the process begin. The pendant is reshaped over a narrow rod. The bracelet is heated, straightened, and coiled again, this time with a whisper of oil rubbed into the metal. The earrings are polished until they shine like lake water under moonlight. Usta melts down the ring in the small crucible, and the flame flickers with anticipation. The gold melts without complaint, pooling smoothly. When poured into its new molds, the metal hisses just once and then stills, a new form, waiting for a new hand. The bell is the last piece. It is not repaired, it is restored. Usta taps it with a tiny mallet, adjusts the loop inside, and holds it to his ear. The apprentice rings it, he frowns, taps again. They repeat this 5 times before the tone returns, not louder, just right when Mala hears it. She exhales like someone setting down a memory too heavy to carry. The final pieces are wrapped in cloth, cushioned with dry petals, and handed over. No gold changes hands, no coin is paid. But Mala leaves behind a woven pouch filled with lentils, 2 small mangoes, and a bead necklace made of river shells. It's enough. You ask Uste if he remembers every dowry he's worked on. He doesn't answer immediately. Then not with my mind, he says, but my hands do. That afternoon, a small boy arrives at the workshop. He's barefoot, dusty, and holding a broken bangle. He says it's for his sister. He doesn't explain how it broke, but you suspect goats were involved again. Uste takes the bangle, smiles, and gestures for the boy to sit. You watch from the doorway, the sun curling toward the horizon, the bell still ringing faintly in your memory. Another day, another piece of gold remade, gifted, carried forward. Some treasures are loud, others simply echo. You begin to lose track of days. Each morning blends into the next, marked not by grand events, but by subtle rituals. The smell of heated charcoal, the hush of filing tools, the rhythmic pulse of bellows breathing life into quiet flames, and always the gold, changing, bending, waiting. Today, Usta brings out a piece unlike any you've seen so far. It's an old pendant, maybe centuries old, its surface worn nearly smooth, but faint lines still remain a pair of eyes, a crescent above them, and a frame of tiny dots like a halo. You ask if it's a religious image. He tilts his head and replies, maybe. That's how it goes here. Not everything is explained. Not everything needs to be. You learn that motifs in Nubian jewelry are often layered, part symbol, part style, part ancestral echo. A spiral might be the sun, or a river, or a memory. Designs traveled with traders, yes, but they were always remixed, interpreted through local hands. Usta starts sketching again, this time on a thin sheet of gold, using a bone stylus. His movements are slow, like someone redrawing a dream from memory. You watch as a bird emerges, wings outstretched, head turned, claws open, but there's no aggression in the image. It's serene, watchful, protective. The apprentice hands him a sharper tool, a tiny chisel shaped like a triangle, and Uste begins carving. Each tap is so gentle you barely hear it. And yet, over the next hour, the bird deepens, feather by feather, stroke by stroke. When he finishes, the creature looks ready to blink, next to you. A merchant from the eastern border waits patiently. He's brought a satchel of trade goods incense resin, beads from the Red Sea coast, and a handful of coins just stamped with faces unfamiliar even to Uste. Some have holes punched through them, strung and worn as pendants, jewelry by accident. He watches Uste work, but doesn't interrupt. You eventually learn why. He's here not just to trade, but to exchange designs. In a pouch lined with sheep's wool, he carries tablets of fired clay, each one pressed with different jewelry patterns, swirls, sunbursts, stylized hands, stars. They're not finished pieces. They're stencils, templates, ideas. You help lay them out on the mat, careful not to chip their edges. Some are cracked. One has a clear thumbprint preserved in the clay, as though the original artisan wanted to be remembered, not with a name, but with a touch. Uste examines them, nods, then disappears into the back of the workshop. He returns with his own stencils, flat, rectangular slips of hardened beeswax marked with grooves. His are older, fainter, worn down by use, but still legible in the right light. The two men swap a few, not many. It's not a market exchange. It's a conversation, a quiet agreement to let someone else carry your lines into another world. Historians still argue how far Nubian styles spread. Some pendants found in Jerusalem share unmistakable similarities to those made along the Nile. Other designs show up in far-off graves, wrapped in linen beside amulets and teeth. Did Nubian artisans travel? Did their work migrate with pilgrims? Or were their styles simply too beautiful not to be copied? You suspect the truth is, as always, is all three. As the merchant departs, Uste wraps the exchange stencils in cloth and sets them on a high shelf. He doesn't label them. He'll remember later that day. Noura returns. She's not alone this time. Two other women trail behind her, one older, one barely more than a teenager. Each carries a small parcel. You step aside as they enter, and soon the workshop fills with a kind of quiet hum. They don't speak much, just open their bundles and begin. The younger one uses a loop of gold wire to shape tiny charms, leaves, birds, seeds. The older woman polishes chain links, muttering softly to herself, perhaps a song, perhaps a spell. Noura works on a clasp, checking it repeatedly, then passing it to Uste for testing. He clicks it shut once, opens it, clicks again. They nod. You realize then that these aren't competitors, they're collaborators. In Nubia, jewelry isn't a solitary craft. It flows between hands, between styles, between families. One person may forge the wire, another will polish. A third might engrave the final touch. It's not about credits, it's about finish. And fusion. Some of the designs now being made blend influences so seamlessly you wouldn't know where they started. A cross wrapped in Arabic calligraphy, a fish inscribed with a Jewish star, a sunburst pattern adapted from Byzantine coins but reimagined into earrings. They aren't symbols of confusion, they're declarations of connection. When the women leave, Oost is still engraving. His new piece features a ring of stars around a central sun. You ask if it's a royal design. No, he says. It's for a child, a baby, born during the flood. They wanted something to keep near her bed, not to wear, just to hold, to keep, to bless. You sit with that image for a long while, gold made not to impress or command, but simply to soothe, a gift for someone too small to know they've been gifted. That night, the workshop is quieter than usual. The apprentice sweeps the floor with gentle strokes. You place the tools back in their pouches. The forge breathes out its last warmth, and on the table, a small piece of metal cools beneath a linen cloth. Tomorrow, it will be something else, but tonight, it's just resting. The wind changes overnight. It's not dramatic. No sandstorm sweeping in from the desert or thunder shaking the fig trees loose. It's subtler than that. A cooler breeze in the morning, a tension in the air, like something waiting just outside the edges of the village. When you step outside the workshop, the sky is a softer blue than usual, and the air smells faintly of far-off rain, even though the clouds are nowhere near ready to deliver it. The Nile looks different too, slower, heavier, like it's holding something under the surface. By mid-morning, Oost is in the corner of the workshop, going through a stack of folded parchment. Most of it is covered in scribbled figures, weights, names, symbols. But tucked between the records is something stranger, a page filled not with numbers or measurements, but diagrams, circles, arcs, tiny dots charted in lines like constellations. It looks more like an astronomer's sketchbook than a goldsmith's. You ask what it is. He shrugs. It's for balance. At first, you think he means aesthetic balance, symmetry in design. But then he starts explaining, softly, haltingly, about how certain shapes align with certain stars, how certain days are better for forging based on the river's current, or the phase of the moon, or the placement of Mercury, though not everyone agrees on that last one. This is when you learn about the scholar goldsmiths of Mercuria. Mercuria was one of the great medieval Nubian kingdoms, and though the empire itself fell long ago, its reputation survives, especially among older artisans like Uste, who talk about it the way children talk about fables. The scholar goldsmiths, according to tradition, were craftsmen who blended astronomy, metallurgy, and theology into a single, patient science. They knew not just how to melt and shape gold, but when and why. Historians still argue whether this group was real or mythologized. Some suggest they were part of monastic communities, using gold work as a form of spiritual practice. Others believe they were simply well-read artisans who kept better notes than their peers. No one can say for sure, but the diagrams in Uste's hand are convincing, and the way he watches the sky before lighting the forge today, yeah, that's not just superstition. He chooses not to work immediately. Instead, he takes down a small box from the workshop's shelf. Inside are thin scraps of metal, barely thicker than a reed. He lays them out on a cloth, arranges them according to shape, then begins comparing them to the diagrams. You lean closer, they're samples, test pieces, failed experiments, but not discarded. Each one bears a unique engraving or shape. One has a spiral that ends in a square. Another, a tiny figure with outstretched arms and a star above its head. These aren't jewelry prototypes. They're records, visual notes, glyphs in gold. The apprentice watches too, eyes wide. You've never shown these, he whispers. Eustace simply replies, you weren't ready. It's not condescension, it's invitation. You watch as he selects one of the scraps, places it under a glass lens, and begins tracing its edge with a needle. His movement isn't rushed, it's meditative. He hums quietly, no song, just a scale rising and falling, like a call to something invisible. He says it's a piece meant to carry meaning, not a message. Exactly, more like a map. You think about all the objects you've seen leave this workshop: earrings, rings, charms. What if some of them weren't just decorations or gifts or currency? What if they were diagrams in disguise by early afternoon? Uste has etched a new design onto a thin pendant, a line of dots curling into a crescent. With a single square placed precisely at its end, he compares it to the chart again, nods once, then says, this one is for travel. Protection, you ask? No, clarity. You let that hang in the air. It sounds like something out of a proverb. But when he places the pendant onto a cloth and sprinkles it lightly with water, watching how the droplets form and slide, you begin to understand. For him, clarity isn't just a spiritual quality, it's a material one. It's balance, flow, alignment. Later that day, Nura returns with Sophia. They sit and watch for a while, asking nothing. Eventually, Nura reaches into her satchel and pulls out a ring. Not new, not polished, bent at the edge, one side cracked. She places it on the table and says, I think it's one of theirs. She means the scholar Goldsmiths. The ring is delicate, its band twisted like rope. Around the edge are tiny symbols, triangles, stars, a vertical line repeated 3 times. Uste holds it to the light, then sets it beside his diagrams. It fits, not perfectly, not conclusively, but enough to pause everyone in the room. The apprentice whispers, did they really mark their pieces this way? Uste doesn't answer. He simply places the ring in the center of the table, and everyone leans forward, not to claim it, but to witness it. This moment isn't dramatic. There's no chant, no grand discovery, just a silence that wraps around everyone, soft and complete. That evening, you sit outside, looking at the sky with new eyes. The constellations begin to appear. You can't name them, but you recognize their shapes from the pendants, the bracelets, the failed scraps, and the polished heirlooms. You start to wonder how much of the world has been mapped in gold, worn on ankles, ears, and wrists, guiding, guarding, clarifying, without anyone ever knowing. And then you smile, because maybe they did know. They just didn't need to say it out loud. It starts with a ripple, not in the river, not in the air, but in the voice of the apprentice, who mutters something too quietly to catch. He's standing by the door, a piece of half-formed gold in one hand and a wet cloth in the other. You look up, waiting. Usta looks up too. The apprentice repeats himself. The river's high, that's simple, but the way Uste sets down his tool makes your spine straighten. Flood season doesn't announce itself with drama. It seeps in, creeps forward, first. It's just dampness along the reed beds, then puddles in places that shouldn't puddle, then someone's goat sinks to the knees in what used to be a path. By the time you call it a flood, it's already at your door. The workshop isn't in danger, not yet, but Uste moves like it is. He steps outside, shades his eyes, and scans the horizon. You follow him to the edge of the village, the Nile, normally docile and stretching like a sleepy cat, is restless today, muddy, thicker, closer. You can see the line it's not supposed to cross. It's already crossed it when you return to the workshop. Nura is already there, sleeves rolled, hair tied in a scarf knotted tight. She doesn't need instructions, neither does the apprentice. Safia appears not long after, carrying 2 bundles of twine and an armful of pottery shards. It's not panic, it's choreography. They begin to lift everything, tools, molds, stencils, cloths, onto shelves. The parchment bundles are tied shut and placed inside jars lined with cotton. The crucibles go into a crate packed with sand. The scrap gold is swept into sealed gourds and slotted between roof beams. Uste wraps the newest commissions, 3 necklaces, a set of earrings, and a pendant shaped like a gourd blossom in layers of linen, then tucks them into a hollow behind the workbench. You only notice the cavity now. It's been there the whole time, like a secret pocket in a well-worn robe. The flood might not reach them, but it might. In this place, water is both friend and menace. The Nile feeds the crops, gives life to clay, and cools the air in the brutal heat, but it also remembers old paths, and when it decides to walk them again, it doesn't ask permission. Historians still argue whether Nubian villages developed advanced flood preparation techniques or relied on communal memory passed from elder to apprentice. What's evident here is that memory is more than enough. Everyone knows what to do as the others work. You help reinforce the walls with baskets of sand and weave mats to block gaps where water might slip through. The smell of mud grows stronger, sharper. A rooster somewhere in the village decides this is a fine time to sound the alarm, despite having no idea what's going on. By midday, the floor of the workshop is cleared, the forge is out, the tools are elevated. The work has paused, but not stopped. In a dry corner, Usta sits and begins polishing a pendant, not because someone ordered it, not because it's urgent, but because his hands need to keep moving. His rhythm, today, is protection. Outside, villagers call to each other. Children are herded indoors. Goats are tied higher. Boats that haven't been used in months are dragged from under awnings and patched with strips of cloth and resin. Some people smile, others don't. By late afternoon, the water reaches the base of the farthest field. The grass folds under it like it's being laid to bed. A small, wooden footbridge groans in protest, then disappears beneath a rising film of brown. Inside the workshop, the air feels different, heavier, charged. You glance toward the ceiling and notice something hanging there, a gold disc, thin and plain, nailed into one of the beams. It doesn't glitter, it just hangs. Oost catches your gaze and answers without you asking. It's a wait. You nod, even though you don't understand. Later, as the water pushes closer, the group gathers inside the workshop, not for shelter, but for stillness. Nura prepares tea. The apprentice opens a window to let in the wind. Safia hums a tune under her breath, one that doesn't match the moment, which is exactly what you need. Uste picks up a lump of beeswax and begins shaping it with his thumb. You watch as a tiny figure emerges, not a charm, not a piece for sale, just a small, soft sculpture, a person with arms raised. as if holding the sky. He places it on the windowsill. You don't ask what it means, because tonight it means exactly what it needs to. The flood may come, the workshop may drown, but not everything will be lost. Some things, memory, rhythm, gold, float. The flood doesn't roar in, it creeps, a quiet advance, like a guest who was never invited but has come anyway, shrugging as though to say, "Well, you knew I was coming eventually." You wake to the sound of dripping, not rain, not leaks, just water pressing into the lowest parts of the village. The Nile has breached the final field. The far end of the goat pens is underwater. A child's sandal drifts past the fig tree near the workshop, sailing gently like it has no intention of returning to its owner. Inside, the floor remains dry, for now, but the air is saturated, thick with the scent of wet mud and leaves that were never meant to swim. Even the walls feel damp, like they've been holding their breath. You touch one and feel the cool grit, its surface weeping in slow resignation. Uste enters without a word and immediately begins checking the high shelves. The crucibles are safe, the molds are dry, the parchments sealed. His hands touch everything, not frantically, but with the same rhythm as always, the same quiet ritual. You sense something shift in him, not panic, not even worry, just a deeper sort of awareness, the kind that comes when a craftsman realizes his space might not hold much longer, and yet he sets up his tools. The forge remains unlit, but on the work mat he lays out wire, soft wax, his finest needle file. You watch, puzzled. A commission, you ask. He shakes his head. A copy of what he doesn't answer. Instead, he pulls out one of the oldest pieces in the shop, a brooch shaped like a sunburst, its rays formed by twisted strands of gold. It's not ornate, it's not large, but it has presence. You've seen it before, tucked into a cloth bundle marked with ink that has long since bled into the fibers. He begins measuring it, sketching its dimensions onto a scrap of waxed linen. He murmurs to the apprentice to begin heating wax, just enough to shape, not enough to melt. The others enter gradually. Noura and Safia arrive first, then the woman from the fig tree, then a neighbor you've never seen before, holding a clay jar like it's priceless. No one speaks loudly. They gather at the edges of the workshop, watching Uste work. The copy he makes isn't perfect. It's not meant to be, but it carries the shape, the weight, the feeling. Every curl and twist is recreated, not identically, but faithfully. He doesn't rush, even as the water laps at the garden wall, even as the courtyard darkens beneath thick clouds. The brooch, you learn, belonged to his teacher, not his father, not a relative, just the man who once taught him how to melt, measure, and listen. It was the first piece Uste ever helped finish. The original is too old now, brittle at the edges, worn smooth in places where the gold has forgotten what it was meant to be. But its copy, born of flood and memory, will endure. Historians still argue whether such objects were meant to be passed down or buried in honor. Some say copies were made to confuse grave robbers. Others say they were made simply to survive. You begin to understand both. By late afternoon, the water reaches the workshop's edge. It doesn't burst in. It enters politely, creeping between the bricks, darkening the floor like ink soaking through cotton. No one panics. Ust lifts the copy to the highest shelf and wraps it in cloth. Safia begins sweeping the water out with a reed broom, not effectively, not seriously, just to do something. Nora gathers the tool pouches and carries them to the neighbor's roof. Others follow. The apprentice drags a wooden chest onto stones to keep it out of the water's reach. You stay, watching Uste move from item to item, touching each one as if to say goodbye, or perhaps thank you. Outside, the river murmurs. A boat floats by, carrying children wrapped in blankets and baskets of unbaked bread. One of them waves. No one waves back. The village is too busy carrying memory uphill. Oost sets one last piece onto a shelf, the small sunburst copy. Then he lifts the original and tucks it into his sleeve. He doesn't explain. He doesn't need to. You step into the water now. It's cool, surprisingly clean, like a long-delayed guest finally stepping over the threshold, bowing politely, promising not to stay long. The tools will dry. The floors will be swept again. The forge will be relit, eventually. But tonight, it is water that occupies this space. You sit on a high stool, the water gently touching your ankles, and listen to the gentle, stubborn sound of goldsmiths refusing to stop by morning. The floodwater has paused, not receded, not vanished, just paused. It glistens in alleys and courtyards, lapping gently at doorways, reflecting back the sky like a cracked mirror. In the workshop, the lower stones are slick and cold, but the shelves are untouched. The wax has held, the tools are dry, and the gold, well, the gold was never really worried. Was it Uste arrives early, barefoot, the hem of his robe soaked to the shin? He carries a small bag over one shoulder, and when he empties it onto the mat, the contents shimmer with quiet defiance: 3 broken earrings, a bent bracelet, and something so twisted it's hard to tell whether it was once a ring or a coin. Gifts from the flood, he says. They came from the village paths, washed out of places they'd been tucked away and forgotten. No one's claimed them. Maybe no one ever will. But they'll be reborn just the same. You sit beside him as he lays the pieces out like puzzle fragments. He doesn't sketch. He doesn't measure. He just starts working, as if his hands already know the way, as he files, melts, and reforms. You see a new piece emerge, not a replica of the originals, but a fusion of all 3, a pendant shaped like a drop of water, its lower edge hammered into a faint spiral, a flood memory, a charm not to ward off water, but to remember that it comes and goes. The apprentice joins, working on a chain for the pendant. He's careful now, measured, less fidgeting, more flow. He moves with that early certainty artisans begin to carry, not confidence, not yet, but familiarity. Safia arrives mid-morning with a folded cloth and a piece of river-worn driftwood. She doesn't ask permission. She just begins carving, not with a goldsmith's tools, but a knife too big for her hands. She works slowly, tongue tucked in the corner of her mouth, shaping the wood into what looks like a small box. You ask her what it's for. She shrugs. For the pendant, she says, and other things that float outside. The village begins to pulse again. People sweep out their homes. Laundry is strung between acacia trees. Children splash where paths used to be. There's laughter, not much, but enough. Usit finishes the pendant just before midday. He holds it to the light, turns it slowly, and then places it in Sophia's box without ceremony. It fits perfectly. A coincidence? Maybe. Or not. You spend the afternoon fixing, not grand repairs, just tightening hinges, drying mats, oiling wooden handles, the rhythm of recovery. The forge stays cool today, but no one minds. The air is too heavy for fire. What matters more is the hands, still steady, the eyes, still searching. Nura stops by late in the day, not to work, but to bring honey-dipped dates and roasted chickpeas. She doesn't say much, just sits in the doorway and watches the light shift across the floor, her fingers wrapped around a cup of tea that never seems to cool. Usta finally speaks. We'll start again tomorrow, and no one questions it, because in this workshop, time is a circle. Water comes and goes. Gold is broken, melted, reformed. Hands learn, forget, and remember again. You leave the workshop as the sun begins to fall, your sandals slapping quietly in the mud. The Nile, behind you, continues its slow retreat, still bloated, still restless, but leaving space once more for dry paths. From the doorway, Oost calls out, not loudly, just enough to catch your ear. He holds up a new piece, a small bangle, made from salvaged fragments, shaped in the style of old Mercurian design. For the girl who lost her sandal, he says. You nod and smile, because of course it is. The village is quiet again. The water still lingers in corners, in puddles, in the scent of the wind, but it's no longer a threat, just a memory now, cool and reflective. You lie back near the workshop, eyes tracing the outlines of the ceiling beams, the soft rustle of reeds brushing against the doorframe. The forge is quiet. The tools are at rest. Somewhere nearby, someone is grinding grain. Another is singing to a baby just out of sight. The pendant lies inside its box. The gold is cooling. The night is stretching out its limbs. You let your breath slow, like the river. No hurry, no resistance, just gentle giving. The stories you've seen and heard today are already folding themselves into dreams, the touch of wax under fingers, the soft jingle of anklets in floodwater, the shape of a charm born from forgotten pieces, reassembled with care. Even the sky seems calmer now, less sky, more blanket, a quiet dome wrapped around the village like someone tucking it in. You imagine the workshop tomorrow, coals lit again, metal warming, Safia humming, Uste frowning at something only he can see. A new commission, a new day, but not now. Now. There is only this moment, a quiet bench, the scent of tea, the soft creak of drying wood. Your eyes begin to close, and as they do, you remember what Uste said about gold, that it doesn't vanish. It just changes shape, and so do we.